So I'll say first, before I say anything, I just want to say how lovely it is that my dear friend Myokei has agreed to speak to us on this event. Thank you so much. It was incredibly generous of you. I'm looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this effort that we're making is part of something that our communities have been engaged in recently, the last couple of years. So, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. So we're just moving ahead with this study. And I just want to say that we live in a country where many delusions are taught to us from the moment we arrive in the world. The most fundamental from a Buddhist perspective is that we are taught that we are a separate self who must make our own way in the world, separate in fundamental ways from others. And in Buddhist practice, we are told, and some of us know, that we can wake up from delusion, from greed, hatred, and delusion. But we also know it requires clear awareness and a lot of effort. James Baldwin describes our situation very clearly. He says, "We are trapped in a history we do not understand." So our Buddhist practices support us in hearing and seeing and changing the situation. The stakes are high. Personal liberation isn't possible until we are all free. And that includes freedom from the system of completely delusional and arbitrary categories of race that has been designed to maintain a system of privileged white supremacy. We can't be free of this system until we are all free. The Buddhist perspective offers freedom, yet within the actual practice centers, there are barriers and blind spots. We hope during this series of talks, with this inaugural talk today, to work toward awakening to and then ending the harm caused by the system of white supremacy. Speaking for myself, I have a lot to learn. And one of the things that I want to learn and practice with you all is to get more practice in talking together about race.
Yeah, this is part of an ongoing effort that Galen mentioned that we're all involved with and we're all committed to. There was, of course, a horrific, rude awakening for all of us on May 25th. Do the sounder. Yeah. 2020 with the horrific murder.
Just a second. I can't see it. I know.
Of George Floyd. But the issues of race, gender, and sexual identity have been with us all along. And for us in the Buddhist community, with an ethical commitment to supporting all sentient beings, we continue to wish and support and encourage every individual being in the pursuit of their deepest aspirations. Just to say 2 sentences about me, I'm a co-founder and resident teacher at Dawn Mountain. I'm Harvey Aronson. I think I've said that already. Our mission at Dawn Mountain is to further the spiritual growth of our diverse community as a living bridge between traditional Tibetan Buddhism, Buddhist teachings, and curious people everywhere. I missed the wonderful opportunity of introducing my illustrious colleague, Galen Roshi, but I think she probably took care of that. So I'll move on to introducing Myokei Caine-Barrett Shonin.
Troy.
She is the first woman of African Japanese descent to be ordained as a priest in the Nichiren Shu. First woman and first Westerner to hold the position of bishop in the Nichiren Order. Priest of the Myokei Temple here in Houston, Texas. For people who are not familiar with Japanese Buddhism, the Nichiren Shu is one of the major religious organizations.
You're supposed to introduce Troy.
I'm sorry. Galen is supposed to introduce Troy. Things got a little bit discombobulated.
You are. It says you're supposed to introduce Troy.
No, I think I am. I'm happy to introduce Troy, if that's okay. Is now a good time?
That was a good time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Troy Porter is a longtime senior member of Houston Zen Center, a very dedicated Zen practitioner for at least 2 decades. I think it's more than 2 decades now. It's getting up toward 3 decades, who also has a very busy professional life and thriving family life, but he maintains very, again, devoted practice at the Houston Zen Center. And I've missed him so much during the pandemic. So it's so nice to see you right there.
Yeah.
And he's been a key player in our Dharma inquiry into race in the US, and a driving force and inspiration in this inquiry. So he will monitor our question and answer and guide us in that process. Now back to you, Lamaji.
Troy, are you going to explain now how the question situation is going to work? If you are, you need to unmute.
Okay. Yes. Hello, everybody. And I am very happy and very thankful to be here. And Galen, that is a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. So in the chat, you should be receiving a link that should take you to what is called a Slido. And there you should be able to type in your questions. And with this particular format, from my understanding, if a question is really liked, you have the opportunity to check it. So with this kind of thing, if the question really is a really good question and it makes sense and everybody likes it, that question kind of moves up to the top. So I want to encourage everyone to go to the Slido. I'll be keeping up with the questions as they come in. And once Myokei gets through speaking, we will then start the question session, from my understanding.
Thank you. And I do want to give a hats off to Anne Glegg and Amy Langenberg, who inspired us with the Slido. They've been doing amazing work on both race and sexual abuse issues in Buddhist Sanghas. Very, very inspiring, very, very thorough, and very, very balanced. A true inspiration for all of us. So Myokei Caine-Barrett Shonin is an active teacher in Houston. She serves in the prison community, and she's currently involved in the steering committee for a large national Buddhist teachers conference that we're all looking forward to in October, just I think 2 weeks away, focused on issues of social justice in relation to Buddhist Sangha. We are sure that we will all be moved by what we hear today, with this part of our program to take about 45 minutes, followed by questions. I'm just going to start with one prompt question, but Galen, if Myokei Shonin seems to get to a pause and you seem to have something on your mind, feel free to ask her. But I would like to ask you, Myokei, and I did read your biography on your page for your center. It's so inspiring. If you could share something about how you became interested in Dharma, what inspired your particular path and how that developed, and the challenges that you have faced with your life story.
Sure. I think, hi everyone, and thank you all for being here. I often find myself at a loss as why this would be interesting, but because it's just my life, right? But I understand that we all have different encounters that have widespread implications. And the more I think about my life, I encountered Buddhism as birthright, but I didn't know that for 50 years. And so it's been a journey of rediscovering my connection to Buddhism since the very beginning. I'm a product of 2 different cultures, 2 different ethnicities, and born in the aftermath of World War II in Japan. So technically that kind of makes me an immigrant as well. And my parents met by accident. My mother's roommate was quite ill and was supposed to meet her boyfriend. And so she asked my mother to go pick him up at the train station and bring him back to their apartment. And all she knew about this man was that he was tall, he was black, and he had a little bit of white hair. And so when she saw my dad, she said, "Wow, that looks like the guy." And she took him back to her apartment, and her roommate was like, "Who is this man? You brought the wrong guy." So that was their beginning. And initially they were just friends. And after some length of time, they started becoming more interested in each other. And so after my birth, my dad was actually in Korea at the time. So when I was born, he heard the song Linda on the radio. So that's why I was named Linda. And it was, throughout my life, I felt the dumbest song I'd ever heard. But it was, when I go to sleep, I never count sheep. I walk with my arms around Linda. And my dad used to play that on my birthday every year, much to my great embarrassment and annoyance at times. And because they thought that he wasn't coming back because all communication had ceased, and he was sending money to support my mom and me, I was put into an orphanage. Because if you recall, when we talk about colonization and supremacy, it's everywhere. And in Japan in particular, mixed race children were highly undesirable. And over the years, I've heard many stories from many different mixed race Japanese of children who were just abandoned in parks and left to die. So I was very fortunate that I was placed in a situation where, as I understand it, by the time my dad came back to Japan, I was on the verge of being adopted. And he stepped in and rescued me and brought me home. So it was a source, I think, of how I felt about, was I in the right family? Because that was a question I used to ask myself all the time. Because there was something I know must have happened in the sense of that separation from the family I was raised with. And my aunt, who was very close to me at that time, as I found out again 50 years later. So I came back to the States, or came to the United States. And as a military family, we were moved constantly. So there was a lot of trauma, I believe, in the fact that my dad would be gone sometimes, and my mother, with her very limited English and culture in America, had a very difficult time. And most of her friends at the time were all Japanese war brides. So there was a very deep connection to each other as they were able to share their fears, their anxieties, and even some of the difficulties they had being in America at that time, which continued on up until I was in high school. And so some of the things that I gained from that experience was understanding the suffering of those who were different, those who were immigrants, those who were not considered part of the American story. And I didn't learn until I was in the 4th grade that also included me, because somehow when you're a kid, you're not aware so much. And that was the first time I ever heard the N-word directed at me, and that was by a teacher. Now, we had lived in New Jersey, where my brother is born, New York, where my younger sister was born, and finally in Germany, where my youngest was born. So coming back to the United States was, how would you say, an opportunity or a tragedy, because racism hit us all right in the face, the kids especially. And my father, bless his heart, really tried very, very hard to keep us away from racism. he never talked about our race, our ethnicity. He only said to us, you are Caines, this is who you are, and so this is important that you live up to being a Caine. And fortunately, both of them had the kind of attitude that your name and how you lived up to that name was important. So I never had issues around my ethnicity from my family to deal with. It was always, well, you're a Caine and this is what you have to do, which fits in perfectly with my exposure to Buddhism again when I was about 11 or 12. And as I said, my mom's friends were all war brides and they were all Buddhists. And my mother was invited to come to a Nichiren Shoshu meeting, which she refused, but she allowed me to go because her friend's daughter was going. And the thing she said to me was, don't join anything. You can go, but don't join anything. And you know that's just the wrong thing to say to some of us. So I came back from that meeting after hearing the chanting of the Odaimoku and smelling the incense, feeling as if I had come home, without really understanding why that felt like home. And there wasn't much of a support system at that time, except from these women. And since my mom wasn't really into religion, we didn't go to the meetings or anything like that. So it wasn't really until I went away to school, to college at 18, that I encountered other Buddhists. And I was not going to join those people because they wore weird clothes and they looked like what I perceived to be like Nazis, because they're running around with AAO kind of thing. And it was just, no, that's not for me. I was very independent, I wasn't going to be like anyone else. And part of that stemmed from the fact that I was not like anyone else that I knew, and was always encountering issues of what are you? And then from both sides, you're not Black enough and you're not Japanese enough, so you're not with us. And so fortunately, the Dharma was what brought me to a place of comfort and understanding that I didn't have to be those things. And it's still a journey that goes on to this very day, because it's always a surprise when this stuff comes up. And I think that I've gotten past it, but it comes up again. So I was never Black enough. And I went to school in Cleveland, Ohio, which was a school that was largely Jewish. But it was during the Black Power movement, that time when everybody was Black and I wasn't, because I couldn't wear an afro. And people would tell me, your mom's not Black, so you don't really know what it's like to be Black. And you have to choose. And it was always this thing of having to choose. And I couldn't, because how do you choose one parent over another, right? And so I just found my own space in a way, but I was so exotic to people. And that was just another thing to have to deal with, being exotic, because nobody sees who you really are when you're this exotic object that people just want to hang out with because you're exotic. And at that time, I was quite ignorant about life in general because I'd led a very protected life on a military base. And so I didn't encounter a lot of things. And one of the things I encountered in Cleveland, Ohio was pimps and whores. And I didn't know they were real people because I thought you only saw them in the movies. And so when I ran into real people that actually fit into those roles, and one of the things about being an inner city campus was that every freshman year, all the pimps would come down to campus looking for fresh stock. And that's where the exotic thing was a big deal. But again, that thing about being a Caine was the one thing that kept me centered, even though I didn't understand all of the things that were going on. It didn't seem real to me. It was like really, truly watching a movie. Even as I often would go to places with some of these folks, because I had friends recognizing my ignorance, and they would ask these people to keep an eye out for me. And so I had a great deal of protection from these women and these men, because they recognized this person won't survive if we leave her alone. I've often wondered about the protection of the Dharma even then, because it kept me safe in times that many people died. Many people, even my roommate, ended up being caught up in drugs and prostitution. So I came back to Texas. My dad had settled in Texas because that's where his life was in the military. And I was, I guess you'd call me a hippie type person because I didn't dress like anyone else. But the Dharma and getting involved personally in the community was what kept me really centered and grounded, even as I was totally different from my entire community. Because none of the other girls my age were doing the things that I was doing. I had been protesting the war and Pepsi Cola and shutting down our school campus while I was there, and really getting into this thing about, fighting for things that were important and that were unfair. I was still very much naive, thinking that, okay, we're going to do this protest and everything's going to be okay after this. And then realizing long term that no, these are more deep-seated issues. And as I continued to practice within the Nichiren Shoshu organization at that time, it was a very tender place. And I'm so grateful to these war brides who really taught me the truth about community, about Sangha. Then I moved to Houston as a result of a job. And it opened up an entirely new world of people who did not understand the concept of Sangha. And so the first thing I was confronted with was, wow, now we got a Black person, so we can get more Black people to be involved in our Sangha. It's like, okay. And then it was, but she's kind of weird, so we have to put her with those people who live in Montrose. All the actors and actresses, the theater people. So arbitrarily, I was placed in a group of folks who were all artists and people who worked theater and just, the oddballs, because I was not normal like the rest of the folks. And that began another form of education into really looking at the community I was with and understanding the limitations of the community I was with. Because Nichiren Shonin's Buddhism speaks about the equality of all beings. And yet that's not what I saw. And, there is gay people. Well, we can't have gay people as leaders. That might make other folks uncomfortable. And then you can't have girls of color representing Betsy Ross, because that's not American. And then, these folks have AIDS. We got to keep them out of the community centers because, we can't allow that to not let people feel free to participate. So all of these things in my head and physically kept coming up that, we're talking about equality of all beings, but it's not happening. And every single person that I met that had any form of mental illness or any kind of difference was ultimately sent to my group because it was like, well, send them over there, she'll take care of them. And so it taught me the truth of equality, because even the folks that I had that were autistic, people with schizophrenia, and all other kinds of differences, we in my group all challenged ourselves no matter what, because the teachings say it's for everyone. So we had to prove it, not only to them, but to also ourselves. And that was, I think, the greatest teaching ever. To see people who, even off their medication with schizophrenia, chanting the Odaimoku, participating in Dharma activities, and somehow finding their way back to, my meds are good for me, and I need to go back on my meds. Or helping a young woman with autism find a way to realize some of her dreams by using the Dharma and saying to her, the Dharma says you can transform your life. So it's up to you. And those were small steps that helped us build our community together in spite of all of our fears and some of our tendencies to, stay away from people that are different. And we all have those. Many of us talk about a man we used to see on the streets on Alabama who was a wild man. And he would come up to your window of your car and knock on the window and ask for money or whatever you could give. And he was foul. He smelled bad. He looked, like you wouldn't want to be around that person. But inevitably, he became a teacher for all of us, because as we talked about him, we understood he's showing up to teach us something. There's an expression, and ichigo ichien. You know that one, Galen, right? And how any moment can be momentous and lead to a great treasure. And he became a treasure for many of us because we all saw him and we all had to figure out how to deal with him. And it seemed that once everybody accepted him, he moved on. We don't know what happened to him, but he did move on. And every single person, even into the prison system, when we were invited to come in, has the same opportunity. And our founder, Nichiren Shonin, was such an incredible role model for us, because he also was a person who did not come from high class. And he used his life and all of his obstacles to illustrate perseverance, to illustrate his patience and his understanding of embodying the teachings so that he could lead all people to awakening. And we had a service for him this morning because his Parinirvana Day is Wednesday. And just remembering how he said that they say I will be well regarded after my death. And how true that was. Because today he is well regarded, even as people call him a rebel, a revolutionary. His letters to his followers tell a very different story of a man who was very tender, who prized women, who honored their sacrifice and their support of him, not only him, but their husbands, as the husbands made the treks to go visit and carry the messages from these women to him. And so there's a sense of agency, I think, that comes to women because they were so centered in some of his writings. I mean, we all know about his major writings, the theses that went to the government to remonstrate against the government following incorrect teachings. But we're all guided by the fact that he had great love and compassion for all beings. And this is the thing that I think we're all trying to embody in ourselves. And I know it's not easy, having to take a stance. I did leave Nichiren Shoshu because I could not find the equality of all beings that was guaranteed in the Lotus Sutra, and came over to Nichiren Shu, and there did find it. Even as culturally there's still a lot of baggage, and the women are still fighting for equality. And it's time. And I think Nichiren Shonin always said the teaching, the place, the time, the capacity of the people. And we're in that kind of moment right now. That all of these things that are coming up that have been revealed to us, especially in the last year and a half, that all of the blinders are off. That we can talk about supremacy and privilege and colonization, and people know what we're talking about, even as some of them are quite angry that we're bringing that kind of stuff up. But this is our moment. I believe that truly, to make the effort to make change happen. And as Buddhists in particular, because we have, again, all of our teachings speak to equality, speak to that connection that we all share with all living beings, with earth, with sky, with everything, that we are so connected. And everything we know says yes to that. That it is critical, I believe, for Buddhists to unite together and also with other folks of faith, because it's the only foundation, I think, for the most part, that allows us to accept each other, that allows us to love each other, and to work together to make a better world for all of us together. And not just those we happen to like. And what was it? I think it was it Mr. Rogers that said that you can love anybody if you know their story and walk in their shoes? And that's what we have to do, is learn each other's stories. And keep walking. So, did I cover or not? Leave gaping holes?
No, you didn't leave gaping holes. Galen, would you care to ask something in a follow-up manner? Can you hear me?
I can, and I successfully unmuted. Thank you so much. That was amazing. That was really amazing. I like the way you started. You can't imagine that, or it puzzles you perhaps a little bit that it's just your life. So how could other people find it interesting? I assure you that was fascinating. Amazing. Thank you. So I guess for a follow-up question, I was struck when you said that, one moment, each precious moment, ichigo, ichie, and so your ability to be present with that is remarkable, part of your character, part of your training, just beautiful. And yet we are enmeshed in a network of karma and conditions, the Dharma net. So all the N that have brought us to this moment, for instance. Can you say something about that net in your understanding? The inescapability from this net. What would you tell us about that?
Well, according to Nichiren Shonin, you can escape it by chanting the Odaimoku because it lessens the effect or can eliminate it altogether. However, we know that there are things you have to go through no matter what. And those things are the building blocks of who you become. And when I look at that, I would not be where I am today, happy in my life as, the person I am continuing to become, if I didn't go through all the crap, and use a principle that we call changing poison into medicine. And really being able to take these experiences and situations and use them to build my life, to open up my heart, my mind, my circumstances. So many things, I look back at times that I should have probably been killed because I used to hitchhike a lot. And, looking back on it now and seeing, I don't even know how I survived because I was really that dumb about the dangers that I faced. And somehow have always been able to get out of those situations, but also understanding that it wasn't because I was smart. It was because I stood on the basis of my faith and chant my butt off, And I can remember having a near rape experience. And I started chanting, and the guy thought I was crazy. And I was so happy he thought I was crazy. But he also thought I was just out there because I told him, you may succeed and you may hurt me, but never forget, I will haunt you for the rest of your life. And if you kill me, I will come back in on you. And he's kind of like, okay, bye. And I thought about that. I thought, you're pretty insane. But it's reacting in that moment. Because I would never think about that. But just my life just said, okay, go for it. And just do it. And we're all faced with that. And
I also am struck, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I also am struck by, I don't know if it came through so much in your talk right now, but you are, except the fact that you're a teacher, a Buddhist teacher, you do very careful, and your prison work, you do very sophisticated and careful care of people. You take care of a lot of people. And I know you took care of your mother a bit when she needed translating when you were just a little child.
Right.
So somehow or other, you've always found strength in that outward turned care for others. Is that part of your Dharma practice, or how do you see that in your life?
I see that coming from my dad, because our home was always open, especially to young soldiers who had nowhere else to go. And he just always brought people home. And so this is what you're supposed to do, is to take care of each other. And my mom has that kind of, when it comes to family, that when my grandmother, my father's mother, came to live with us, and she had some kind of damage as a result of electroshock therapy when she was younger. So her brain was kind of, she wasn't always present. And my mom would take care of her, and my grandmother would say, I don't want this white lady touching me. And my mother would say, but I'm not a white lady. But that's how my grandmother perceived her. And she would just continue to bathe her and clean up after her and take care of her. And finally, my grandmother got used to having a white lady take care of her. So she was quite pleased about that. But I also think part of our practice is the longer you practice, the more your heart and your life turns toward that. I mean, we're always taught from the beginning it's practice for self and practice for others. And so you practice for self to be able to do practice for others. And from the very beginning, that's what it's all about, is to keep that going.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Troy, do you have a question, or are you moderating from the gallery?
We have one question. Let me get to it real quick. Let me find it. So the question here is, since this is our moment, what does effort for change look like to you? What suggestions do you have? And I think that's a really good question, something actually I'm struggling with myself. So I would like to hear your perspective on that.
I think it's just our response to everything that happens, to everything we encounter. Most of us, I think, it's difficult to respond in a kind way sometimes when you encounter people in ignorance. And because just like everybody else, I get angry and I want to go off on people. And I have to take a moment and reflect on, who am I harming? You know, am I doing my practice? It becomes easier as you go along. I remember an experience I had in conducting a workshop on racism, anti-racism. And I was sharing a story of being mistaken for a prostitute when I was working in corporate America. And the lady came up to me and she said, "I don't believe you. I think you just made that stuff up." I was like, I could feel it inside. I was about to blow up. I said, "Well, thank you." And I walked off. And I really had to go to a place where I could take a moment to center myself by chanting. And later, as I went into the restroom, I ran into her again. And somehow I said to her, "Thank you for showing me a spot within me that needs my attention. So I appreciate your opening that space for me so I can continue to grow. So I'm very grateful for the good in your life." I've never seen a more horror-stricken person as she realized that I wasn't attacking her, but expressing gratitude. Because I did understand that, oh, you got to be careful in these spaces because you could really go off. And I haven't had it lately, terrible, terrible temper back in the day, and would have to go and chant away my anger so I wouldn't hurt anybody, because I felt like I wanted to hurt people. And through chanting, learned that I didn't have to do that. So we all have to find what it is that turns us from that point of a negative response to one that is based on our faith. And I truly believe the longer we practice, the more it becomes easier to do that, because not from thinking, but your whole body, who you are, is enmeshed in Dharma. And so there comes a point, I think you can't lie, you can't deviate from right speech or right mindfulness, because it's part of who you are. And the longer you are walking in that kind of path and in that kind of practice, you don't even have to think about it. It's like, oh, okay, another chance. Here we go. And that kind of eagerness to face your life and all the responses you have to your life are what can present to you magical moments of your own growth and awakening. Yeah.
So you are very, very inspiring. And I do have a question, but if Troy, if you have a question in the Slido, I'll defer to that.
Yes, we've got a few more coming in.
Good, good.
Just a second. Let me kind of. There is a question about your work with prison inmates. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Can you speak on that?
From the beginning, when I first went out, what I didn't know was that I was invited by a group of white supremacists to come out and teach Buddhism. And they didn't know they were going to get this colored woman. So it was quite interesting for a long time because the Muslims, who are all happen to be black, would peek in at us. It's like, what is that woman doing in there with those guys? You know. I learned, I think it was about 3 years later, the whole beginning of that group was in white supremacy. But because I refused to allow them to run the group and that they would have to follow my lead, the person who brought it together left and another person took it on and was later exposed to be a pedophile. And so the entire Sangha busted apart, except for this one man who decided he was going to chant and keep going. And because he lost everything, his status as a trustee, the jobs he had, he could no longer do once people found out he was a pedophile. So he just chanted Odaimoku, and a new community built up around him, which was a very racially mixed community. And so it always has been from that point. And some of these men, I am so amazed at how they've taken to the Dharma and how they've been able to use it to transform their lives. Because I can truthfully say that many of them were not treasured, were not loved, and had no idea of their own value or worth. And once they find out, then they start having something to work for. And I just conducted a wedding ceremony for one of them last month, who got out after being in prison for 27 years. And I'm so amazed at what he's been able to do as he continues to practice. He's built his own company. Now, mind you, he's only been out almost 3 years. He bought a house, and now he got married. And all of the things that he's doing, no one believes that he's doing it because they expect him to be a drug dealer or, back in crime again, and that's why he's so successful now, not understanding that he transformed how he thought of himself. And I know that for many folks who do this kind of work, that's what we see. That people who practice sincerely do come to a place of understanding that they are valuable, that they have a right to the Dharma, and they have a right to be treated with respect and dignity. And it reminded me that I didn't tell you how I found my birthright. So I'm going to throw this in at this point. When I started studying to become a priest, now my family in Japan knew that I was with Nichiren Shoshu Soka Gakkai. And so when I started studying to become a priest, my aunt said to me, "You've come home." And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? And I came to find out at that moment that my family originally was a Nichiren Shu family. And she was the one who had breastfed me, because she used to tell me that all the time. I used to breastfeed you, and I'm thinking, I'm an old woman. You don't have to tell me this. And finally found out why she was telling me that. Because when I left, she was devastated because she felt she had lost her child. So it was like coming back full circle, that you come home to who you are.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to everybody. The questions are coming in. So here's our next question. It starts with the statement. I'm moved by how there is no gap between Buddhism and social justice for you. Just a response to what is needed. Can you talk more about this? That's the question. Can you talk more about this?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
It comes back to what the Buddha said in the Lotus Sutra. I don't see this one or that one. That all are equal, and I love everyone, all beings. And the fact that he said that's the reason for his advent into the world was to save all beings. And I take that very seriously, because I figure if you're going to say that every day, that sentient beings are innumerable, I vow to save them all, you better mean it, because the consequences of not meaning it can be devastating in your life. It took me a long time to get there, because what did that mean when I first said it? They were just words. But the deeper I got involved in Dharma, it's very difficult not to respond to what you see in front of you. I remember the time during the AIDS epidemic when people would not visit anybody who had AIDS. I was like, how can you do this? You can't catch it that way just by breathing the air. But there was so much negativity attached to people. And some of these people gave their lives for the Dharma. They really served and deeply studied and deeply practiced. And to find that they were left alone in their last moments, it was just abhorrent to me. And I remember conducting a funeral for a young man who was a good friend of mine. And someone saying to me, well, you just upset the apple cart, because now everybody's going to want a funeral like that when they die. It's like, and why shouldn't they have a funeral like that, where people are expressing their love and joy of knowing a person? Because our lives are important. Everyone's life is important. And if we as Buddhists can't address that, then we're failing, I think, in our responsibility as bodhisattvas who have taken vows to save all beings. And it's really always that simple to me, that this is what we have to do. No matter what. That expression, if you see something, say something, do something, and hopefully always act in accord to what is needed rather than what you want to give. And that's the other part of it. Because so often we could say, oh, I can give this, or maybe it's money or whatever, and it could be the most imperfect response. But again, the Dharma always guides us correctly, I think.
That is a beautiful reply. And personally, I have always struggled with remembering that when that moment comes up, that it is not so much what you want to give, but what's needed. And I really like that you said that out loud. And that really resonates with me. And that is a beautiful, beautiful reply to that. I want to say thank you. And hopefully I will remember that when the next time comes along.
Me too.
I would like to go to the next question. And this Slido, like I said, you like a question, it moves it up. So I'm kind of going in that order of how the questions are moving up by how much everyone is liking it. So here's another one that just came in. Okay. You had an article in Tricycle magazine about chanting the Odidaimaku. I know I'm not saying that right, and I apologize. Okay. And about how/why that simple chant is so powerful. Please tell us more about that.
It is an engagement of your entire being. That you don't have to think about it because it becomes a part of the flow of life through your body. That's how I look at it. That it's kind of like your chi energy gets bound up in the rhythm of the Odaimoku. And so it just runs through you. The sense of all your senses are activated. It becomes a way to really embody the Dharma, at least for me. I think about the fact that, when we're kids, we're taught, don't go by your first impression, or, don't trust how you're feeling about things, right? Do you remember those days? Or you can go ahead and hug Uncle Johnny even though you don't want to because he's your family. And the one thing that chanting Daimoku feels like is that awakening of your entire body, so that it's, how would you call it? Like a scanner, so to speak, that your body acts like a intuitor, if you will. That you can feel the energy from other folks. You can feel intention, all of that, because your body becomes a life scanner. And it also connects you to other people very clearly. When chanting with others, there's something that happens in that vibration and that energy of chanting together and trying to harmonize and, without even having to have words with each other, that you become family that way. And I know that happens with silent meditation. This is one way I think that for some folks, and one story we use is about the two brothers, one who was very smart and the other one who was kind of dull, who couldn't even remember past sweep the floor, pick up the dirt. And that's all he could remember. But he could chant. And because he could chant, he still was able to achieve his awakening. And so awakening has to mean a lot of different things for us as Buddhists. And the chanting, for me, has always been the easiest way to awaken. Because I don't have to think, and I don't have to fight my monkey mind. I can just focus on chanting words and disappear into those words. And sometimes even hear the sound of others chanting with me, even when I'm totally alone. So I think of it as being a scanner, that it helps you become the scanner. Much like the, that book by Goleman where he talks about the multiple intelligences, that all of us have, but we're not aware of it. And chanting the O Daimoku can activate and make you better at being all of those different intelligences that he talks about. I think he was at 7 when he wrote the book, and there are maybe 9 or 10 now. I haven't kept up with them totally. But I do know that being able to sense good and negativity and, bad stuff has always been the result of chanting for me. Keeps me safe.
Thank you. Thank you. A second question that has a really good question that has moved up in the account here is, can you tell us more about your experience at the monastery in Japan? Was the monastery a more welcoming space?
Yes. I was terrified when I went to the monastery because my teacher had told me how horrible it was for him. And I think I was in tears almost going up you have to climb these steps up to the monastery. There were only 16 of us women. And I was placed in a group. So we had 4 Hans, as they're called. And I was so fortunate that these women were so open to being with a person who didn't speak their language beyond child language. And so I had my Japanese English dictionary and my English Japanese dictionary. So that's how we communicated. It was extremely powerful for me because I had not spent time with Japanese women, real Japanese women, not Japanese American women, because there's very much a difference. These women were amazing. We talk about our difficulties in sitting seiza. I've never seen anybody sit seiza like a Japanese woman. And they could sit seiza for hours and not complain and just do it, And we worked out a system among ourselves that we helped each other. So one day I would do laundry and fold everyone's clothes, and the next day that would happen for somebody else. And they taught me how to do the practice in the monastery, even without language. My advantage at that point was that I knew more about the ritual side of practice because here in the West we had more access. That a lot of them could not go to some of the trainings we went to, whereas when we would need a training, they would bring someone over from Japan. So we had a trade-off of sorts. And we became very, very close. And I think the greatest gift out of that were the friendships I made, but also being able to understand my mother. I didn't have a great idea about my mom because I never understood her story. And being in the monastery without language, without the ability to seek comfort from someone who would understand me was very difficult, very lonely. And many times because the language of the Dharma in Japanese was totally alien, so I couldn't understand half the lectures I went to. And it put me in the position of living my mother's experience, of being without a language, without a culture. And the only thing that saved me was that I had access to the culture because I was raised in that culture. And I suddenly understood her strength, which is what gave me the strength to continue. Because I did have some difficulties physically, and they wanted me to go home, and I was like, I'm not leaving. No matter what, I'm not leaving. And they were exasperated by the pressure I kept putting on myself. to continue to really persevere through all of the difficulties. And what was so great, we had a new archbishop of Minobu, and he sent me a note halfway through the program and said, I know it's difficult, but keep going. And that was amazing to me that he thought about me. And then later on, he sent me an interpreter to maybe help me with a lecture. And the interpreter was like, well, what do you need help with? And I was like, everything. He said, okay, I can't do this. And at the end, the ordination part, the final ordination part, my husband, my daughter, and my mother, who said she would never enter another temple again, came to Japan to witness the final ordination. And the archbishop, who didn't speak a lick of English, had practiced the entire time to be able to tell me how proud he was that I made it through. And he did that in English.
Wow.
And so every time I would go to Japan, I'd see him, and he would always greet me and tell everybody, she's here again. And so that was public knowledge every time I came to the head temple.
That is a wonderful compliment. A wonderful compliment.
Definitely.
Let's see, our next question. How did you deal with being orphaned and brought back into the family by your father? And this person writes a statement saying, my mother experienced something similar and still suffers from that.
I didn't really know about it until I was older. And I'm the person in the family that wants to know the answers to all the questions. And my mother doesn't want to tell me anything. She gets very upset when I bring it up. And the only reason it came up was it was a time when my parents decided to separate. I was in my 30s at that time. And my mother came to live with me. So that's when I found out about that story. And it answered for me the question of why I felt like I didn't belong to my family. It's like I was supposed to be somebody else's child. But again, it was meeting that moment and understanding that there's a purpose to everything. That happened to me because I needed to experience that to become who I am today. And not to feel negative towards my mother and her family because of the circumstances of what was going on where they lived. And just, I used to wonder when I was a teenager, what would that be like if I had a different family? Who would I be if I found my real family? And then to come and find out that I was with my real family. So, again, it's the practice. Centering yourself in the Dharma where there's a Haitian expression that fits. It's dégager, to find a way where there is no way. Because that's what we do with our Dharma practice. Somehow, we find a way.
Thank you. One of our last questions that we have is, can you talk about how racial justice work is bringing together more Buddhist communities from different lineages? And then there's joys and possible challenges of collaboration.
Well, even outside of Dharma centers, the one thing I would say is that this work has to be done always in collaboration. It does me no good if I'm talking to a bunch of white folks and I come out and say, you have white supremacy problems or you have white privilege problems, because they're not going to hear it from me. And I've worked with a person in your Sangha, Trish McFarlane, over the years, and actually seen the value of having a team of people work together. Even in my own community, we've done teamwork that way to bring all of the issues to light. It's not easy. And I can tell you that from no matter how long I've been doing this, it's still not easy. Even when people are eager to do it and really trying hard to do it, it's just not easy. And the point is that we're all subject to brainwashing, colonized thinking, and having to extract ourselves from that kind of thinking. The thinking of privilege, the thinking of supremacy. I mean, who would want to design a world where supremacy was an issue if we're all equal? And how do we live that if we as Buddhists believe in the equality of all beings and the connection that we have to each other, how do we work together to overcome that? And the easiest way is for us to work with each other and do our internal work together. So that I can't do undoing white supremacy in my life without a person who's well-versed in it, even though we're all well-versed in it. But I may not see it. And in the same manner, to be able to extract ourselves from colonized thinking, from really waking up and staying awake, we have to do it together. And we have to not be afraid. One of the things I see is there a lot of fear and a great deal of hesitancy because, and I would say this to white folks, your guilt is not needed. What's needed is the ability to listen and not be afraid of what you hear. Because it's not really personal in the sense that it's not about you. And sometimes in conversation with folks, people say, well, we want to center Black voices. Great. But that doesn't mean you don't still have to do your work. Because you can center my voice all the time, but if you don't hear what I'm saying and take it in, then it doesn't matter what I'm saying. And so the work has to be very intimate and developed around trust. And so that means getting to know each other and really being able to look at another person and see them for who they actually are and accept that person, faults and all. One of the greatest teachers, I think, of a way to do this is Parker Palmer. I don't know if you've heard of the Circles of Trust or his Center for Reconciliation. But in his habits of 5 healthy habits to realize we're all in this together. It's the first thing he says. But how he builds the circles of trust where people can talk to each other. I've been in rooms where I was the only person of color and dealing with people from the South and having the fear that, oh my gosh, this old guy from Alabama and I have to sit in circle with him. And to find myself embraced and touched in such a way by these people open and willingness to just bare their souls. And it makes it a lot easier when they do it is for you to do it. And so our willingness, each of us, to be vulnerable, to be open, to share our stories, because that's the key, our stories. And I think all of us in the West have been so exposed to the notion of shame and guilt that it's very easy for us to get caught up in those things. And the beauty of Buddhism is that there is no shame and there is no guilt. And to release ourselves from that allows us to be able to have those conversations and to develop the intimacy that we can really see each other. And that's when it begins to be joyful. Yes.
Myokei Shonin, I so appreciate everything you have shared. We have arrived, unfortunately, at our time, but what an inspiring time it has been. Galen, you have a few, I think, things to say.
Well, I thank you so much, and your emphasis on the collaboration made my heart warm up, because we really do have to do this together, and we've got a long road ahead of us, but I'm so happy to be walking it with you. And I think all the people on this call feel included in your remarks. Is that true, everybody on the call? Can we all applaud? I'm so glad that we're in this journey together. Thank you. And Harvey.
Okay, so the three centers are committed to social justice, and this is a donation-based event, and Emily will be posting in the chat a link for donations, which will be split evenly 3 ways between our 3 organizations so that we can continue our work oriented towards social justice. Before I just have a concluding sentence, I want to say that Myokei Shonin, I feel your atoms are compassion. The very atoms of your being are compassion. Actually, it's interesting, in Dzogchen, they have 3 layers of ultimate reality. There's essence, nature, and the final one is, it's actually the word compassion. It's like all manifestation is really a manifestation of compassion. Of course, sometimes it's a little bit more evident than others. And what I loved about your presentation is you are so real. It's clear you have mental afflictions like we all do. You've owned them, you've lived them, and you've also seen them transform. And really, there's all this talk in modern physics about particles are actually energy and light. And sometimes we can experience that in a human being. So your particles are really light, but it's real light. I mean, pardon my English, but you don't fuck around. I mean, you've been there.
Thank you for saying that.
And I can appreciate it. You just don't fuck around. You've been there. And at the same time, you've been through it. And you know what it takes to go through it. And we each do that slightly differently, and it looks different with every individual. But what a precious Dharma you have embodied and have shared. Want to encourage each and every one of us to take what you have said seriously, to take our Dharma practice seriously as it relates to social justice. Each one of us as individuals and each of our organizations will do this in the ways that we see fit and are appropriate and we're capable of. It is a kind of must do at this time. We realize that. And we're all talking together about how we can do that in the most meaningful, appropriate, as you said, in ways that make sense for us. And we certainly are looking forward for more contact in the future with you and your inspiring presence. And I'll just let Galen say something else as a conclusion.
Could I say something
Yes.
real quick? And it's totally off track. Someone from your community contacted me about being connected with someone in Japan, and I can't find the connection, the contact. So if you're here, to please contact me again.
Okay, we know who that is.
I think that was Tiffany.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you
She'll
so
be
much.
thrilled. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. And Galen, I give you the final baton.
Actually, I'm passing it immediately to Troy.
Okay.
Well, I want to say thank you. And I also want to say thank you to everyone who sent in a question. These were really great questions. It really gave me an opportunity to hear your answers and also reflect on myself as well. I feel very blessed to be a part of this conversation. And that's because I have Galen in my life. I'm also the vice chair for the Rothko Chapel here in Houston as well. So I have been involved with that social justice conversation there. But that has a non-denominational slant to its approach. But I'm very thankful for Galen making sure that I'm here. And so my final words to say is that my heart is just bursting open right now with the conversation and the answers that you gave, and hearing your story as well. Because you are right, kind of finding that family can be a challenge sometimes when you are from a marginalized community, but trying to be part of the larger community. That can be a challenge. And I think kind of like Harvey said, I think you've navigated that very well. You've got the heartaches to show what it took to get you there. And I say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for participating, and Myokei and Shonin and Galen Roshi and all the participants. May we dedicate the merit for the benefit of all beings throughout space, without partiality. We look forward to more of such events.
You
Take
all
care, all.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Take care. I'm okay. See you soon.
Yes. Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to hang up now.